I had my hands around a king's throat before I understood that was what they were. The hall was full of wolves in fine wool, and every one of them was watching the cup. I was watching his hand close around the stem of it, the slow, certain way he reached for anything he meant to keep, and something under my ribs went cold and loud at once, a warmth I had no name for screaming no in a voice that was not mine. I did not decide to move. I was simply across the dais, my fingers shutting over his, the wine arcing dark across the white furs and hissing where it struck the stone like it had teeth. The whole court came to its feet. Steel came out of 3 scabbards, and the most powerful man in the Iron Territories looked down at the woman gripping his wrist in front of his entire kingdom and did not pull away. It started 11 days before any of that, with a creature I had not yet learned to call a king. I found him at the bottom of the gully where the spring melt runs, half in the water, and I thought he was dead. Then I thought he was a horse. He was neither. He was the largest wolf I had ever seen, silver going to grey along the spine, one shoulder open and ugly and crusted black, and he was looking at me with an expression no animal has any business owning. I am a herbwoman. I live at the edge of the king's forest because the rent is cheap and the people who need me cannot afford the village healer, and I had exactly enough sense to know that a wolf that size could take my arm off before I finished apologizing for the splint. I knelt anyway. That is the whole story of my life, really. I knelt anyway. All right, I told him. All right. I am not going to be the interesting part of your day. He let me touch the wound. That should have been the first thing. A dying animal does not lie still for a stranger's hands, unless something in it has already decided you are not a threat. And I, fool that I am, decided that meant he was sweet. It took me until full dark to get him up the hill on a sledge meant for firewood, and most of my dignity besides. I cleaned the wound by candlelight. It was deep and clean-edged in a way that snagged at me. Too neat for a snare, too narrow for a bore, but I was tired and he was shivering and I let the thought go. That was my first mistake. I have catalogued them since. There were several. I named him Biscuit because, an hour after I was certain he could not stand, he stood, crossed my one room on legs like a newborn foal's, and ate the entire round of oatcakes cooling on my table, then looked at me as though I had done something. Biscuit, I said. He had the grace to look ashamed. Not very ashamed. The particular degree of shame of a creature who would do it again. I made him a bed by the hearth out of an old fur and a folded blanket, and he looked at it with what I can only describe as disdain, and then lay down across my feet instead, all of him, a weight like a fallen door, and went to sleep. I did not move for 3 hours. I told myself it was because I did not want to wake him. Here is what no one tells you about living alone at the edge of a forest, you talk. To the kettle, to the goats, to the dark. And now there was something warm in the room, with eyes that followed me, and the talk came out of me like water finding a crack. I told him about my mother, who taught me which roots heal and which ones lie. I told him about the winter I nearly did not survive, and how no one came. I told him I was tired of being useful to people who would not say my name in daylight. I told him a secret I have never said aloud to a living soul, and he set his great head on my knee and sighed as though it had cost him something, and I laughed at myself for needing a dog to feel heard. He was not a good patient. That is too kind. He was a tyrant. He decided, on the second day, that I was not permitted to leave his sight. When I went to the well, he came too, dragging his bad leg with an air of grievance, and stood between me and the path like the path had insulted him. When old Hennety's boy came to fetch a fever draught, Biscuit placed himself in the doorway and produced a sound from somewhere near his foundations that sent the boy back to his pony at speed. and would not be moved until I physically sat on him. He took my second-best shawl off its peg and carried it into his bed and lay on it and dared me with his eyes. And he brought me things. This is the part I have never been able to explain. A grouse, once, laid at my feet still warm, which I cooked because waste is a sin. A perfectly round river stone, a sprig of the white starflower that grows only on the high ridge, a half-day's climb on 4 good legs, and an impossibility on 3, which I found on my pillow on the 4th morning, its stem crushed where careful jaws had carried it down a mountain so it could be where I would wake. I put it in water. I am not made of stone. By the 6th day, the wound that should have taken a month had closed to a silver line, and I knew enough to be frightened of that, and chose again not to be. By the 7th, he was pacing my small house like a crown prince inspecting a cell. That night, he stood at the door and looked back at me, once, with those eyes that knew too much, and when I opened it because I am not a jailer, he was gone into the dark like he had never been, and took the warm shape of my whole week with him. I cried. I want that on the record. I cried over a wolf named Biscuit, and then I was furious with myself, and then I went to bed alone in a house that had learnt the sound of breathing that was not mine, and could not get it back. I did not sleep. So I was awake, and dressed, and steeping the first bitter cup of the day, when the knock came at dawn. No one knocks at my door at dawn. The dying do not knock. Their kin throw themselves against the wood. I opened it with the kettle still in my hand. There was a man on my step. He was tall in the way that rearranges a room before he has entered it, dark hair shot with grey at the temple, a wound at his shoulder showing through a shirt of a quality that did not belong within 20 miles of my door, and his eyes were the colour of a wolf going to grey along the spine, and they were looking at me with an expression no man has any business owning, and I knew him the way you know your own name shouted across water. "Oh," I said. "Oh, you have got to be joking." His jaw worked. Whatever speech he had prepared on the long walk down had clearly assumed I would not speak first, and possibly that I would fall to my knees, and the kettle in my hand was throwing all of it into disorder. "I have come," he said, with the careful weight of a man laying each word on a scale, "to retrieve what is mine. You ate my oatcakes." He stopped. A muscle moved in his cheek. Somewhere behind the iron of his face something was suffering. That was, "The wolf does not always. You slept on my feet. I was injured." He said it like a man conceding a city. "I called you Biscuit. I had the unholy pleasure of watching a king close his eyes briefly in the morning light. I made you a little bed. I am aware of the bed." His voice had gone very low and very even, the voice, I would learn, that he used when he was holding something shut by main force. "I am Eirik. I rule the Iron Territories. My wolf was injured by. It does not matter. You sheltered me. The debt is mine, and I have come to settle it and to take back what was. If you say what is mine one more time about a dog," I said, "I am going to need you to be specific about which of us you mean." I had not meant to say it. It is the trouble with my mouth, it works without me, and I watched it land on him like a blow he had not braced for, watched the king of the Iron Territories, the strongest wolf alive, by all accounts, feared from the coast to the mountains, go entirely still on my doorstep with the dawn behind him, because his wolf had spent a week answering to Biscuit and bringing me starflowers, and we both knew exactly which of us his wolf had decided was his. And only one of us was managing to keep a straight face about it. It was not him. "I will send for you," he said abruptly, which answered nothing, and turned, and left, and got perhaps 30 paces before he stopped. Because something silver was rising under his skin without his leave, his shadow lengthening wrong against my woodpile, his hands curling, and he forced it down with a shudder that I felt in my own teeth, a flare of warmth and fury through some channel I did not know I had, and walked away very fast without looking back. I stood in my doorway for a long time. I would like to tell you I had the good sense to be afraid. What I actually felt, watching a king flee my goats, was a warmth I had no business feeling, and the dawning, ruinous certainty that my week was not over. That it had, in fact, only just learned my name. If you want to know what happens when a herbwoman who told a wolf all her secrets gets summoned to that wolf's court to face it as a man, and what his wolf does the first time the whole pack is watching, stay with me. His name is the least of what I had not yet learnt about him. Follow along so you do not lose the thread, because the next part is where I stopped finding it funny. The summons came 2 days later, carried by a man built like a siege. He filled my doorway the way Biscuit used to, and he did not knock so much as inform the door of his presence. You are the herbwoman. Not a question. The king requires you at the keep. I am Gunnar. You will come now. I did not like him. I want that recorded too, because it matters later. He had a hard, flat face and a sword worn like a tool he used often, and when he looked around my small house, at the fir still in the shape of a great body by the hearth, at the starflower wilting in its cup, his mouth thinned, and I decided he was exactly the kind of man who throws women like me off battlements for the inconvenience of having been noticed. I was wrong about him. I was wrong about almost everyone in this story, which is a thing I have had to make my peace with. But I was not wrong yet, and the keep did nothing to soften me. It rose out of the pines, black and enormous, and the great hall swallowed me whole, a throne carved as a wolf mid-lunge, 100 faces turning, the smell of wood smoke and iron, and too many people who knew their own worth. And on the dais, in grey and silver, a circlet doing nothing to make him less than he was, sat the man who had slept across my feet. He looked at me, once, and then very deliberately did not, and the not looking was so loud that the woman beside the throne noticed it, and her face did something complicated and cold. "This," said a smooth, sorrowful voice, "is the creature who kept you." He was an older man, richly dressed, with a face built for delivering bad news gently, Lord Aldrich I would learn, who had advised the king's father and now advised the son, and who had a way of seeming to apologise for every cruel thing he said while he said it. "Your Grace, the whole forest is talking. The Alpha King, nursed in a hovel by an unranked woman, who by her own account called him, a delicate pause, a flicker of a smile that grieved to exist, a household pet. You see how it looks. You see what your enemies will do with it. For your sake, sire, the kindest thing would be to settle her debt in coin and send her back to her roots and her goats, before the story does you real harm." The hall murmured its agreement. The cold woman, Lady Saskia, a cousin of some branch, who had expected for years to be chosen, let a small laugh escape, and it cut. I had been called worse by better. I lifted my chin and looked at the king, who was supposed to be the most frightening thing in the room, and said, "He brought me a flower." The murmur stopped. "He climbed the high ridge on 3 legs," I said, into the silence, "and brought me a starflower, and put it where I would wake. You can pay me in coin if it tidies the story. But I will not stand in your great hall and call him a tame thing, because he was never tame, and we all know it, and I think the part that frightens you is that he was gentle anyway. It was the wrong thing to say. It was gloriously, catastrophically the wrong thing to say, and I watched it go through the king like a blade, watched his hand tighten on the arm of the throne, watched Aldrich's gentle face sharpen for half a heartbeat into something that was not gentle at all, before the sorrow smoothed back over it. And then a small grey shape shot out from behind a pillar, a pup, half-starved, an orphan of the pack by the look of him, and flung himself across the hall and into my skirts, and would not be pried loose, and into that absurd, undignified silence the king of the Iron Territories said, in a voice gone rough, "Leave her be. The debt is not settled. She stays under my protection until it is. Under his protection." The whole court heard the wolf in it. So did I. They gave me a room I did not want, and a status no one could name, and the king avoided me with the thoroughness of a man conducting a war. But the pup, Pell, attached himself to me like a burr, and through Pell I learnt the rhythms of the keep, and one of those rhythms was that the king did not sleep. I found him in the library on the third night, because Pell led me there, and because I have never in my life been able to leave a closed door alone. He was standing at the cold hearth with a book he was not reading. He did not turn. "You should not be here." And yet. His shoulders moved, not quite a laugh. The fire had burned low, and neither of us tended it. "Ask," he said, to the dark. "You have been holding it behind your teeth for 3 days. I can feel it like a draught. Ask," so I asked the thing no one else had dared. "Do you remember it?" As the wolf. "Do you remember what I told you?" The silence went on so long I thought he would not answer. A log settled. Somewhere far off a door closed. "I remember all of it," he said at last, and his voice was not a king's. "The winter no one came. Your mother's hands. The thing you said into my fur on the 5th night that you have never said to anyone." He turned then, finally, and the look on his face was the one the wolf had worn at the bottom of the gully, the one I had been fool enough to call sweet. I remember being warm for the first time in 9 years, and not knowing I had been cold. "You did not shelter a beast, Wren. You sheltered a man who had forgotten he was one, and he is having a great deal of trouble going back." He said my name like it cost him a coin he could not spare. I did not have a clever thing to say. For once my terrible mouth was empty. We stood 3 paces apart in the dark, and the space between us was a weight I could not set down. And neither of us closed it, and that, the not closing, was the most honest thing that had passed between 2 people in that whole black keep. Then he said, "You should go," and I went, because he was right, and because if I had stayed one more breath, I would have done something we would both have had to survive. It was at my door, an hour later, turning his words over like river stones, that the cold thing finally surfaced. Injured by, it does not matter. The wound. Too neat for a snare. Too narrow for a bore. I had cleaned it by candlelight and let the thought go. And now it came back with teeth. I knew that shape. I had pulled it out of poachers and soldiers both. It was the channel a crossbow bolt cuts, and the black crust around it had not been dirt. I had not rescued a lost dog. There is no such thing as a king's wolf wandering lost. He had been shot with intent, by someone who knew where the king ran alone, and he had not fled to my woods by accident. He had fallen there, dying, because it was the last place his legs would carry him. And the bolt had been wrong because it was meant to be wrong, slow, a poison that closes a wound clean over itself and works inward where no healer thinks to look. 11 days. The silver line on his shoulder, healing too fast over a thing that was not finished with him. I stood in the dark and felt my own face change. Whatever softness I had carried into that keep, whatever girl had cried over a wolf named Biscuit, she was gone. And what was left was colder and very clear. Someone in this keep had tried to murder the man who slept on my feet, and had failed only because a forest herbwoman knelt in a gully when she should have run. And they would try again. Of course they would try again. I did not go to the king. I went to the one man in that keep frightening enough to have done it, because I am, as established, a fool, and because I had to know. I found Gunnar in the armoury, and I told him what I had found in the wound, flatly, watching his hands for the flinch of a guilty man. He did not flinch. He went the grey of old ash, and he said, I told him the bolt was not a poacher's, and the grief in it was real, and I understood. Too late, and all at once, that I had spent 3 days hating the only man in the keep who had been trying to keep the king alive. Who fletches with grey goose and waxed red thread, I asked, in this keep? Gunner's face closed like a gate. Only the master of the hunt. Who answers to the council? A pause. Who answers to Lord Aldrich? The kindest face in the hall, the man who had so gently, so sorrowfully, urged the king to pay me off and send me home, away from the wound, away from the one person who had handled it, and might, given a quiet hour, recognize what it was. There is a naming feast in 2 days, Gunner said slowly, watching me arrive where he already stood. The whole court, the king will drink the first cup from the council's hand, as he has every year since his father died. He looked at me, this siege of a man with something I had not earned. He will not hear it from me. He thinks Aldrich raised him. He will hear it from you, or he will drink it. So now you know what I knew, walking into that hall, that the cup was poison, that the gentlest man in the kingdom had loaded it, and that the king would take it from him smiling out of 9 years of misplaced trust. The trouble was proving it before he swallowed, in a room full of wolves who already thought me a herbwoman with ideas above her goats. I did not get the chance to be clever about it. The feast was lit like a held breath. Aldrich rose with the first cup, sorrowful and resplendent, and spoke of loyalty, of the bond between a king and the men who had shaped him, and carried it to the dais with his own 2 hands like a gift, and the king reached for the stem of it with the slow, certain way he reached for anything he meant to keep. And the warmth under my ribs went cold and loud, and screamed in a voice that was not mine, and I did not decide to move. I was simply across the dice, my fingers shutting over his, the wine arcing dark across the white furs, and hissing where it struck the stone like it had teeth. Because it did. Because where it struck, the stone smoked. The whole court came to its feet. Steel came out of 3 scabbards. And Eirik looked down at the woman gripping his wrist in front of his entire kingdom, and did not pull away. She has attacked the king, Aldrich began, gentle and quick. The stone is burning, I said, and pointed, and 100 wolves looked at the wine eating into the flagstones, and the hall went very, very quiet. It is one thing to accuse a beloved adviser. It is another for the floor to do it for you. Aldrich moved fast for a sorrowful man. There was a blade in his hand, and an arm around me before Gunnar cleared the dice, and the edge of it found my throat, and his gentle voice in my ear had finally stopped apologizing. 9 years, he hissed. I have run this kingdom through that boy, and I will not lose it to a creature who smells of goats. I felt the king change. I have no other word for it. The man went out of him, and the wolf came up, not all the way, the great silver shape rising under his skin the way it had against my woodpile. But this time he did not force it down. This time he let it crest. Because the thing it wanted, and the thing he wanted, were, for once, the same. And the sound that came out of him put every wolf in that hall flat on the ground with their throats bared. Every wolf but one. The orphan pup, Pell, who ran instead at Aldrich's legs and bit down with everything a half-starved thing has, and Aldrich stumbled, and the blade slipped, and I did the second bravest thing I have ever done, which was to drop straight down out of his arm like a sack of roots, the way my mother taught me to fall. The king was there before I landed. I will not describe what the wolf did to the hand that had held the blade. It is enough to say that Aldrich left the hall in irons and considerably less certain of his grip on anything, and that Gunnar's men took the master of the hunt before the feast fires had burned down. But the poison was already in him. 11 days of it, banked low under a wound, healed too clean. and the rage that brought the wolf up had driven it through him faster. I could see it, the grey going wrong in his face, the silver light guttering. The cup had been a second dose to finish a job already half done, and the half that was done was killing him in front of his kingdom, and there is no antidote you simply pour down a king's throat for a poison built to hide. There is only the old way. The way my mother showed me once and made me swear never to use, because of what it costs the one who draws. I put my blistering hands to the silver line on his shoulder, and I pulled. I am not going to pretend I understood the magic of it. I understood the price. The poison came through the channel his wolf had opened to me on the 5th night by my hearth. The one I had felt as warmth, as alarm, as a voice that was not mine, and it came into me the way cold comes into a body that has stopped fighting it, driving into my bones, crushing the air out of my lungs, frost blooming white across the backs of my hands where they gripped him. The hall went to a single point of light. Something old and patient wanted to stay in him, and it could not hold us both, and I made myself the easier door and held it open with everything I had. Choose to endure it, my mother's voice said. From the winter, no one came, so I did. I knelt in a king's hall with poison in my veins, and I chose, again, to kneel anyway. And on the other side of it, when the frost cracked and fell from my fingers, and I came back into a body that hurt in every part, the grey was gone from his face, and he was holding me up off the stone, both of us shaking, in front of every soul who had called me a herbwoman with goats. He did not let go. He stood, and he brought me up with him, and he turned us to face the court that had dismissed me. And he did not give a speech. He simply went down, the alpha king of the Iron Territories, in front of his whole kneeling pack, and put one knee to the stone, and bowed his head to a forest herbwoman with frost in her hair, and said, loud enough for the back of the hall, his wolf chose without asking him. He is done arguing with it. A breath. The hand around mine tightened. Stay, not as a debt. There is no debt. Stay because I am asking, and I have never in my life asked for anything I wanted this badly. I looked down at the most powerful man alive, kneeling in his own hall, waiting on a word from me, and I found that my terrible mouth, for once, knew exactly what to do with the moment. You ate my oatcakes, I told him. You owe me a great many oatcakes. His face did the thing it had been trying not to do since dawn at my doorstep. It broke open into something young and stunned and helplessly glad, and the laugh that came out of him was not a king's laugh. It was Biscuit's. And the kiss he rose into was not a thing of mouths or pressure, or any word I would have to be careful saying. It was the moment the cold left both of us at once. The moment something I had been carrying alone since the winter no one came finally got set down. I had spent my whole life being useful to people who would not say my name in daylight. He said it in front of all of them. He has not stopped. The court did not simply accept it. I want to be honest about that, because the warmth is in the truth. There were weeks of fracture. Saskia and 3 council houses gone north in a fury. Rumours that the king had been bewitched by a root witch. A hard winter of proving I was a Luna and not a story. Gunnar trained me to fall properly so I would never again drop out of a blade by luck. I trained Gunnar to laugh, which took longer. Aldrich was stripped of name and lands and sent to the cold places to think about the boy he had used, and the master of the hunt with him, and the bolt that started it all hangs now in the council chamber, where every adviser can see what gentleness can hide. It is half a year on as I tell you this. The forest has its first hard frost again, the kind that nearly killed me once, and I am warm. There is a bed by the great hearth in the king's chambers, an old fur and a folded blanket, and it does not match a single fine thing in the room, and the most feared wolf in the territories will not let anyone move it. Pell sleeps in it most nights now, fat and insufferable, and mine. A letter came last week from the village that would not say my name in daylight, addressed to the Luna of the Iron Territories, asking very politely if she might put in a word about the rent. I have not answered it. I am enjoying the silence. And every few mornings, when he thinks I am still sleeping, the king of the Iron Territories climbs the high ridge in the grey before dawn, on 2 legs now, and comes back with a single white starflower, and puts it where I will wake. I never tell him I am awake to see it. Some things you keep. I named him Biscuit, and made him a little bed, and told him all my secrets, and then he turned into a man, and knelt in his own hall, and I had to completely rethink, as it turns out, the rest of my life. I would not give back a single oatcake. So here is what I have wondered. Half a year warm and still turning it over, that first dawn on my doorstep, when he said he had come to retrieve what was his and could not finish the sentence. Do you think his wolf already knew it was me he meant, and the man was just the last to find out? Or was there a moment, down in that gully, when I knelt instead of running, that I chose it too without knowing? Tell me your theory below. I genuinely cannot decide. And if you want her story to keep going, the first hard winter as Luna, the council houses gone north, the village that suddenly remembers my name, comment the starflower, and stay with me. There is more of this one. Where are you listening from tonight?